Hello, and thanks for joining today's webinar, Practice versus Process Maturity. My name is Steve Torino. I'm the Principal Solutions Architect of Cybersaint, and I will be walking us through this webinar today. So just to get us started out here, a quick agenda. First, I'll do a short introduction to Cybersaint, and then we'll jump into Practice and Process Maturity. So we'll talk about what they are, how they're different, why they're important, as well as how to use both of them to strengthen your program. We'll then touch quickly on some frameworks and standards that include both practice and process maturity within them. And then we'll go into a use case for using automation to reduce manual effort and focus on maturity. So a little bit of background on Cybersaint. We are a purpose-built integrated risk management platform. We've been around for about 5 years or so, and our mission really is to be the system of record for the risk and compliance business function. If you think, historically across cyber and risk, one of the challenges has been that unlike other business functions, we've typically lacked a system of record whereby multiple stakeholders can work from and gain insights from the work that's being performed across an organization. So if you think about other business functions like finance or accounting, they have general ledger, sales has CRM, et cetera, and we really lacked that for cyber risk. And largely, many of us are still performing our assessments out of spreadsheets and SharePoint and things of that nature. So there's a strong need by some of the largest organizations in the world, really, as you can see, some of our customers there on the left side of the screen, as well as some of our smaller customers as well, to really get off the spreadsheets, right? To get into a system of record where we can start gaining some insights, looking for some efficiencies. So how do we do that? We have some screenshots here from the Cybersaint platform around how we're able to build effective integrated security use cases to focus on elements of insight, data, and analytics. So through things like governance dashboards, where key stakeholders can come in, take a look at where our security posture stands, gap to goal, and understand, where we may need additional resources or where we may be wanting to look for some additional technologies or maybe add people to the problem in some cases to solve some of the challenges that we face from whether it's a risk perspective or a compliance perspective as well. One of the benefits to using a system of record is automated reporting. So there's this system where all users can come in, input their information, score controls, add supporting evidence, things of that nature, and all that's reflected immediately in the automated reports. Historical audit reporting as well as AI and ML mapping and remediation. So that's really unique to Cybersaint, some capabilities we have around identifying particular controls throughout an assessment that we may want to focus on based on concepts like highest cost or lowest cost and highest impact to identify where we may want to start putting our resources towards improving our posture. So some of the use cases that we have in the platform include obviously cyber risk management, but also regulatory compliance, IT security and governance, audit management, and vendor risk management. So touching on practice versus process maturity, kind of the what and the why here. So in a lot of ways, we could take a look at practices as really being the what you do and the processes associated with that really being more the how you do it. So what we have here is an example of CMMC, the DoD framework that came out for the Defense Industrial Base. And we're using a CMMC level 3 as an example here. So starting down the bottom with practices, at level 3 CMMC, is looking for a good cyber hygiene practices. So this is the selection of a number of security controls that could be considered good cyber hygiene. And in many ways, your scoring methodology on how you're performing those is really either a yes or no. So in this case, we're focused on the protection of controlled and classified information, and it includes all the security requirements that have been specified in the DFARS, the 800-171, as well as some additional practices to mitigate those threats. So first we look at, how or really whether we're performing those practices or not, sort of a yes or no. When we start looking at the associated maturity requirement from a process perspective, which at level 3 is going to be managed, we're starting to look for some key attributes in how we're actually performing these particular controls. So we're looking at level 3 here of maintaining and resourcing a plan that demonstrates the management of activities for practice implementation. So we're looking at missions, goals, project plans, resourcing, training, and involvement of stakeholders. So taking each of those kind of individually, missions and goals, a lot of times these may not get as much focus as they probably should. Really, this is the high level. This is the why we're in business and what we're doing. Why we're doing what we're doing. So understanding and having a clear concept around what our missions and goals are really should inform really the entire organization, but from a security perspective, how we're bringing products to market and the goals that we have around that, as well as our mission in general for why we're here. When we start looking into things like resourcing and required training, these things tend to require, in most organizations, kind of a top-down approach, right? So one of the key things we're looking for in process maturity as we increase is that there is communication and involvement with executive stakeholders, that they're being informed, that they're understanding where additional resources need to be given, and that information is kind of becoming more of a continuous feedback loop from the practitioners who are implementing these things to the whether it's internal audit or external audit, that are taking a look at how well these things have been implemented, and then informing the more executive or board level audiences to understand what our risk tolerance is, what type of resources we're going to need to get in place to further our goals and ultimately further our mission, and then pushing that back down, back to more of the practitioner level. So this is also an example from CMMC. This is the progression from both the process and practice perspective of how we're getting from their level 1 to level 5. Really at level 1, from a practices side here on the right, this is where we're at basic cyber hygiene. So this is relatively simple stuff. There's not a whole bunch of controls that are required here. Probably just a best practice for anybody who's in business to be following these basic cyber hygiene protocols. But you'll notice that the process side over there for level 1, the question really is whether you're performing them at all. So in a sense, there is no process maturity at level 1. It's really just the question of yes or no, are we doing these basic cyber hygiene controls? Do we have firewalls? Do we have locks on the door? As we start moving up into level 2, where we're adding some additional controls to bring us from basic to an intermediate cyber hygiene, we're also challenging ourselves to increase our process maturity with it. So at level 2, what we're looking at here is documenting. Do we have our policies and procedures in place? Are we following them, for example? And then as we get up to level 3, which is levels 1 through 3 is where most of the DIB is going to need to be for CMMC, we're adding additional controls to get us from basic to intermediate to good cyber hygiene. But then from a processes perspective, we're also taking a look at how well we're managing it. And so, here's where we start getting to see things not just about documenting in policies and procedures, but also that it's being disseminated, that there's training being provided, that we're having adequate resources to deploy the good cyber hygiene controls that are going to be required for us for this level 3 certification. So CMMC is a good example and a recent example since it's receiving a lot of attention, but it's not the only framework out there that requires both practice and process maturity. If you're not in an industry that has a requirement imposed on you by something like CMMC or C2M2 or some of the more industry-specific frameworks that include a process maturity section as well, you can look at some of the more standard ones. A good example is the NIST implementation tiers. It's not really a maturity model per se, but as you move up from the lower tiers to the higher ones, there are attributes of process maturity that are associated with increasing to each of those additional levels. So that's one to look into. And COBIT is another one as well, sort of more general, not required for any specific industry maybe, but still very widely used, and there is a maturity component associated with that as well. So just wanted to touch a little bit here on how automating compliance can really make a big difference in helping you to focus on maturing. And largely what that comes from is removing some of the manual processes that our teams are having to perform, let's say around scoring controls and adding and uploading supporting evidence, whether it's in a spreadsheet or whether it's in a system like an integrated risk management from Cybersaint. The control automation allows us to, what we're really talking about here in this box in red, is the ability to ingest different telemetry sources from throughout the technology stack and apply those in a way that's meaningful to controls and ultimately up into risk. So if we can start scoring ourselves on the controls that are pertinent to us from our variety of different frameworks and standards that we may have to assess ourselves against, and start to see really kind of real-time visibility into how our program is performing, that frees up a significant amount of time for folks to focus on some of the other aspects of process maturity beyond just, sort of scoring controls and making sure that we're doing the basic things that we need to do. So Cybersaint does that in a few ways. We have quite a bit of automation built into the platform. Over there at the left with some of the really table stakes for any GRC or IRM platform, things like email alerting, workflow, audit trails, assessment sending, things of that nature. But where we get really unique for Cybersaint is in some of the next level automation. So through some algorithms that we have, we're able to provide optimizations in terms of optimization. So, moving forward, taking a look at where we stand today with our current status quo and trying to prioritize where we may want to put some resources to moving things further ahead. So we do that in a few different ways. One is through that higher cost or lower cost, higher impact optimizations, but also through return on security investment. That's another metric that a lot of organizations are using to determine, where they may want to apply some additional resources. And then down here in the machine learning and NLP section, this is where we're getting into that mapping of telemetry sources to controls. We can do that in one of a couple ways. One is really statically, where we're sort of manually understanding that by virtue of using a certain class of technology that there are going to be certain security controls that you'll get credit for, maybe partially, maybe fully. But then also we can leverage some capabilities we have with machine learning to start applying the content of the telemetry sources that we're ingesting, running that through the natural language processor, and then suggesting some additional controls. So that's really fairly mature. That's how we're getting into this continuous compliance visibility, and really being able to associate that with some additional controls can give us insights that we probably have lacked in the past when we're kind of doing assessments on a one-off basis here and there on a specific asset or site or business unit at some cadence and time. So an example here of targeted automation return on investment here. So this is from one of our enterprise customers that we've been working with to really get to these key efficiency indicators that you see down at the bottom of decreasing redundancy by half, by decreasing data silos entirely, and also gaining some additional efficiencies around decreasing user friction and decreasing complexity. So they're valuing this at a 30% efficiency, which is equating to about a $5.4 million a year savings just from leveraging a tool like this. So we talked through some of the ways that we can do that. We can provide that qualitative value by removing some of the manual workflows, right? That's just not only redundant and duplicative, but it's also, frankly, kind of human error prone. So reducing that, allowing some of the automation to come in and take those tasks off of individual contributors' plates can be a real win there. Then just having that continuous compliance and risk visibility, which is really a major gain. It's something that most organizations just do not have today. Being able to have a technology like this to provide that continuous always-on viewpoint is extremely helpful. And then, also from the perspective of proactive risk identification and issue remediation, that can save a lot of time in terms of not having to go through spreadsheet assessments and perform all kinds of Excel wizardry to figure out which ones you may want to take a look at prioritizing. And ultimately that allows us to optimize our resources. So we have kind of a equation down here of determining return on investment from a monetary value perspective. And right at the beginning there is speed, and that comes through the automation. And then when we add on to that the quality of the always-on metrics, adding into that the ease of use of a platform that's been designed from the beginning to be easy to use, as well as control compliance, that's going to help us achieve our ultimate goal of reduced risk. So I appreciate you joining today's webinar. If you'd like to learn more about Cybersaint or have any additional questions around process and practice maturity, please feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to speak to you. Have a great day.